One of the most common questions in Raid Shadow Legends is, who do I 6-star next? It's a question that you'll probably struggle with for a long time in the game. With all the good meta, OP, and useful champions that you've summoned, how do you know who you should focus on first? How do you know who to bring to the top of the list? I struggled with this question for a long time in the game, and I still do at times. In this video, I'm going to share with you some of my thought process when making some of those tough decisions in the game. Now, I'm not saying that these are life and death decisions or even important decisions in your life, but it's kind of a terrible feeling when you put a whole bunch of time and resources into a champion that you thought was going to help you, and then they don't measure up. Resources are scarce and can be precious in Raid, and you don't want to just throw them at a champion that you thought would do something and then turns out they didn't. Yes, I 6-starred Counselor Yasmin. Please don't tell anybody. Here are the priorities that I consider when deciding who to 6-star next. If you're a new player, get your starter champion 6-starred first, and put your best artifacts and accessories on that starter champion. The only rare exception to this rule is if you know that you already have another champion that's a better campaign farmer, and you haven't already put a bunch of resources into your starter champion. Campaign farming should be your first priority as a new player, because it allows you to build everything else that you're going to do in the game. So now that you have your campaign farmer or your starter champion 6-starred, who do you build next? Well, instead of focusing on which champion specifically you should build next, we're going to talk about buffs, debuffs, positive and negative effects. With a few rare exceptions, every champion in this game is unique. They all have their own skills, the way they do damage, the buffs and debuffs that they can apply to their enemies or to their teammates. Two of the most important debuffs that you can inflict upon your enemies are decrease attack and decrease defense. You should prioritize these debuffs first when trying to do damage and to try and survive in a fight. If you happen to find a champion that does both, like Stag Knight for example, you may want to try and build them first, after your starter champion. One of your first priorities when starting the game should be success in Demon Lord Clan Boss. It's really important. It has the greatest return on investment in the game. And if you can build a team that'll yield you the top rewards in Demon Lord Clan Boss, it'll pay dividends for the rest of your time in Raid. And one of the most important ways that you can achieve that is to survive as long as possible so that you can continue to do damage. To survive as long as possible in almost any fight in Raid, you almost need decrease attack. If the enemy is going to get a turn, decrease attack becomes crucial. So having at least one, and sometimes more than one, champion on your team that applies decrease attack to the enemy. If your decrease attack champion can sustain decrease attack on the enemy at level 40 or 50, they're kind of already doing their job and you can probably move on to another priority. Again, we're talking really early game here, but as you can see behind me, that keeps going through the rest of the game. When I'm doing Hydra, decrease attack is crucial. Second, to help you survive, the Ally Protect buff is a really important one to have on your team. Block damage and unkillable are better. Now we're talking about unkillable teams, and most new players won't be able to achieve the stats necessary to build one of those. But it's important to keep in mind that as you keep progressing, maybe you don't need ally protection anymore if you have an unkillable team with block damage or unkillable. You have to know where you are in the game to know what's going to be more important for you. There are several champions in the game that can give your team ally protection. The best ones can also do something else that'll help you in the fight. For example, some champions that do ally protection also apply poisons or HP burn or give your team increased defense or strengthen. All of those things can be really helpful in mitigating damage and also doing damage to your enemy. And some can provide your team with a shield to absorb some damage as well. Also, some will apply block debuffs so that the bosses or your enemies can't apply stun or decrease defense to your team. Or decrease attack that'll stop them from doing damage. If you have a champion on your roster that can do more than one of these things, hopefully 3, you have a really good candidate for someone who can help your team survive during a battle. Now, an important caution about cooldowns. The difference between a 3-turn cooldown for a really important skill and a 4-turn cooldown is success and failure. It's night and day. And I didn't pay enough attention to this when I first started the game. So really pay attention. Some champions, they might look like they do the exact same skill, but if one has a shorter cooldown than the other, it can be a lot more valuable for you in a fight. So now that you've built some champions that can help you stay alive in a fight, next you have to do some damage. Very early, the best way to do damage, on the clan boss especially, is through poison. If your starter champion was Kayle, and he's already a 6-star, you have an adequate poisoner. And you shouldn't replace him with someone else who might be better at poison until the rest of your team is rounded out. There are some better poisoners than Kayle, and some even apply a debuff called Poison Sensitivity, which causes the poisons to do even more damage. We're talking especially about clan boss here, but there are other bosses where this becomes important. But I would caution building another poisoner until after you have other champions fulfilling all the roles that you need for multiple parts of the game. Then when you start to get more specific, you can replace Kayle as a poisoner in some of those teams. But he still could be valuable for you later in the game in other places like secret rooms in Doom Tower. If your starter wasn't Kayle, I would suggest building a poisoner. There are a lot of poisoners in the game, and you'll probably get one if you're patient. So now that you have damage mitigation and some poison damage, it's time to focus on champions that can increase your damage. Your speed is crucial in any fight. All of your skills and all of your stats are useless unless you can take a turn in the battle. On hellhades.com, you can find the speeds of pretty much any enemy that you'll face in the PvE portion of the game. On PvP, you're on your own. Just be fast. But knowing how fast your enemy is helps you to know how fast to build your teams so that you can take turns and keep doing damage. There's also speed tune calculators. Deadwood Jedi has a great one for the clan boss that you can actually plug the people on your team in with their speeds and see what the turn orders are going to be and see when they're going to be able to have their skills available. It's a great tool, and as you build clan boss teams, you're going to advance so that you'll need to do something like that to maximize your damage. So why do I talk about speed when we're talking about damage? Well, like I said, you have to take turns to be able to do damage to any enemy. Sometimes you might need a speed booster. If you can't build your champions fast enough, a speed booster can help you get them over the hump. Also, you might require a champion that can steal turn meter from the enemy, or stun the enemy, or sleep the enemy, or a myriad of other kind of control things that you can do to your enemies. All of those things can be helpful in a fight, and as you keep playing the game, you'll realize which ones apply to the part of the game you're playing and struggling with at the time. And like I mentioned before, if you can find champions that do multiple of these things that help you in the battle, they become a lot more valuable. They're more versatile, and they'll help you in more places in the game. In early game, versatility is the key when you're building champions. Sometimes you'll be facing an enemy that applies a lot of debuffs to you, like the Nether Spider in Doom Tower, and you'll need a cleanser to cleanse off those debuffs. Sometimes you'll face an enemy that puts a bunch of buffs on their team with counterattack or something awful like that, and you'll have to remove those buffs from that enemy. There's a whole bunch of things, and as you keep playing the game, you'll be able to find ways that you can solve those problems. There are champions that can solve the problems. You just have to know which ones they are and what you need in the fight that you're trying to win. Arbiter, for example, can help you win in a fight because she does several of these things to help your team win. For one thing, she can boost your turn meter and give your team increased attack so that your attack-based damage dealers can do more damage. Another thing she can do, if you have her built with enough accuracy, is reduce the duration of the enemy buffs. That can become crucial. It's almost like a buff steal for one turn. She can also apply a weaken on her A1. Now, she may not be the best at any of these one things, but because of her versatility, she's really important as you get her. Most players will build their Arbiter as soon as they get her. But that's just one example of a champion that has a lot of versatility, and you'll probably pull champions that have a lot of versatility early game. But there are a few champions in this game who are really limited as to what they can do. They may have a valuable skill, but it might not help you very many places in the game. Yes, I built a rain beast. Don't tell anybody about that one either. But hold on, to be fair to Rain Beast, he did help me with a very specific part of the game, with Skinwalker Faction Wars. And yes, I did build him for that, and he was useful for that. But I have learned since then that I should have been focusing on more versatility and not just getting that faction taken care of, because it wasn't the last one that I had to solve. Players who use their resources wisely prioritize champions that can help them in multiple parts of the game. Like I said, versatility is huge during the early part of the game. But as you keep playing, and as you get more experienced in the game, and as you start solving most of the problems, you start to min-max some of your teams, and you start to find champions that are good at one really specific thing that can help you in that team, and you build them for that team only. For example, I have 2 Inquisitor Shamails built for Hydra. He's great in my Hydra teams, but I literally don't use him anywhere else. But for that one thing that I have him built for, he's perfect in that role. As you progress further on in the game, you're going to want to build more PvP champions, or player versus player champions, to compete in Arena, in all 3 places in Arena. And I think the wise thing to do there is to build PvP champions like Rhodos that are actually really good in a lot of other places in the game too. In fact, I can't think of really any top tier PvP champions that can't be used somewhere else in PvE. PvP is a really important part of the game, and it can actually help you in PvE. Working on your Great Hall is one of the most important things that you can do in the game, and it depends on how many PvP wins you have in Arena. Also, the area bonuses. Live Arena are really crucial for those. PvE and PvP go hand in hand in this game, and one always helps the other. So whichever side you prefer, don't neglect the other one. Another important tip when figuring out how to win a certain type of battle is watch the fights. Go ahead and take it off of auto once in a while and read what the skills of the bosses are. I know it's kind of boring, but knowing your enemy is how you defeat your enemy. That's how you'll know which kind of buffs and debuffs you'll need. That's how you'll know how to counter some of their abilities. And if you don't know, there's lots of resources out there that can help you find out. The main thing, choose champions that are versatile, that will help you achieve things all over the place in the game. And then, when you get pretty comfortable with most things and you're achieving most things, then start to get more specific about the champions you build that will min-max some of the damage and some of the time that you're spending in dungeons and in bosses and PvP. You'd be surprised what you can learn by reading some of the skills from the bosses. It's really actually quite interesting. Some of them have some really complicated kits. Notice that I haven't really mentioned HP burn or traditional damage yet. That's because there's a lot of options for damage in the game now. And rest assured, you'll have access to something you can use. Most of the champions in this game now are damage dealers that also do something else that help your team. Very few just do damage, but there are a few, and some of them are really, really good. But now we're going to focus on doing damage and how to achieve that. The first thing you're going to want to have on the enemy is decreased defense, then weaken, then you're going to want to have increased attack on you for all of your attack-based damage dealers, or increased defense for your defense-based damage dealers. We don't have an HP buff yet for the HP-based damage dealers, but there are a few champions that increase their allies' HP. So watch out for those. There's not very many. Also, look for champions that ignore defense or do damage based on the max HP of the enemy. They can really help you to spend a lot less time on the fights in this game. As you increase in experience in this game, a lot of times you're tempted to think, well, if I only had this one specific champion that I haven't pulled yet. And that's a really dangerous way to think. The game a lot of times will give you ways to solve certain problems. I haven't solved all of them yet, but I know that if I just stick with it and be patient, I'll find a way to solve that content in the game. Plarium will release another champion that'll make that content easy. For example, when Fire Knight Hard first came out, very few players were able to defeat Stage 10. But as they released Newt and he became a fusion, that was problem solved for that content. We all thought the content was too hard, And then they gave us a champion that allowed us to solve the content. Now, he wasn't free. We had to work in a fusion to get him, but you can still pull him from shards. That's an example of somebody who's really, really important in certain content in the game. If we remain patient and keep building the champions that we can, eventually we will be able to solve all the problems. It just might take some time, so be patient. So, to sum up, how do I decide who to build next? Who should be my next 6-star? Well, the first question you have to ask yourself is, what am I struggling with in the game? What content do I want to solve that I can't do right now? And if you're very early game, that might be everything. So the answer there is to focus on versatility. Focus on building champions that can help you defeat content all over the game. Versatility is key early game. Now, if you're mid-game or later on in the game, obviously you're going to be trying to be a little more specific with your teams. You'll be building champions that have more niche uses specific for certain teams. As you move on into late game, it becomes about efficiency in those teams. How can I do things faster? How can I beat this boss in 30 seconds or less? How can I beat Spider in 6 seconds? Which guys do? How can I avoid manualing my Hydra battles and still be able to help my clan in Hydra Clash? Those are kind of things that we'll solve later. But when you're early, focus on versatility. Mid-game, focus on making each of your teams a little bit better at a time, and then solving the things that are bugging you. Why can't I do this? Find you a champion in your roster that'll help you. I hope some of you find that helpful. I'm Wood, and I appreciate you.